Good morning. If you want to turn your Bibles to James, the 3rd chapter, we're going to be reading from there in just a moment. You look around the world today, we see some incredible technology. Technology is amazing. It's changing all the time. It's like there's a new innovation update every single year or month, and it is having an impact on our world, has an impact on our lives. One of the new technologies that we use at work in our everyday meetings is the transcription. You can press record during a meeting and it will give you a direct copy of what was being said in the meeting. And then there's also these AI summaries that will then synthesize what was talked about in that 30 minutes or 60 minutes to give you the highlights so you can go back and review any important notes. Now, the transcription is pretty good when you're calling into the meeting, but if you're in a large conference room, sometimes the recording can get a little mixed up. And so I want to share with you one of the actual recordings. I think I can share this. There's no proprietary information in this. But this is from a real life, actual meeting with working professionals. So one person said, "And your computer, that's so clocked." "Yes." "On fire." Another person said, "I don't know why, like, sound good." And the next person said, "Blow up, please." And then the final person said, "Needs to breeze." Now, I'm not sure if they were arguing or trying to write poetry in that session, but you can see that the robots obviously got it wrong in this situation. But it got me thinking about what if you had the record button turned on and it was listening to everything that you said for a 24-hour period. And it took a transcript of that. Some of your transcripts would be longer than others. But when something is written down in words and we can read over what's being said, it gets us to stop and to think about the words that are coming out of our mouth. In Ecclesiastes chapter 3 and verse 7, the writer is reflecting on the nature of life, and he makes this statement in verse 7. He says, "There is a time to be silent and a time to speak." We don't often get the chance to, it's a little bit harder at Broadmoor to do a series of lessons just with the rotation of speakers, but I'd like to try to do something that has never been done here before, and that is to finish a series in a single month. And the catch is that there's only going to be 2 lessons. This morning, a time to be silent, and then in 2 weeks, we'll look at a time to speak. But that statement, a time to be silent, is that a true statement? Is there a time where we should not say anything, even if we might have something to say? Look with me in the book of James, James chapter 3, beginning in verse 7. James chapter 3 and verse 7. He says, "For every kind of beast and bird, of reptile and creature of the sea is tamed and has been tamed by mankind. But no man can tame the tongue. It is an unruly evil, full of deadly poison. The writer says, well, look at the world and see all these amazing animals. The horse, it's huge, it's strong. And yet man has been able to capture and to train and to bridle this incredibly strong animal, to get it to go in the direction that it wants, to jump over things, to get up on two legs. And yet, compare that to the tongue. It says no one can tame the tongue. I think what he's getting at is this is a universal principle, a universal truth. And that is there anyone today that can say, I've never said something that I later regretted? I've never jumped in and started to speak when I should have held back. Everyone struggles with controlling their speech, and that's why this statement in Ecclesiastes is so profound. Because what if instead of trying to always say the right thing, what if instead of always phrasing things or putting things in the proper terms, what if instead we just said nothing at all? A time to be silent. Let's look at a few examples from the scriptures. In the life of Job, in Job chapter 2, in verse 11, it says, now when Job's 3 friends heard of all the evil that had come upon him, they came each from his own place. Eliphaz the Temanite, Bildad the Shuhite, Zophar the Naamathite. And they made an appointment together to come and to show him sympathy and comfort him. And when they saw him from a distance, they did not recognize him. And they raised their voices and wept. And they tore their robes and sprinkled dust on their heads toward heaven. And they sat with him on the ground 7 days and 7 nights. And no one spoke a word to him, for they saw that his suffering was very great. The setting here is that Job has just experienced severe calamity. He's lost his possessions, his livestock, his herds have been taken away. He's lost his posterity. His children have been killed in a terrible accident. His 7 sons and 3 daughters. And now finally he's had his physical health taken from him. He's sitting on the ground with nothing but a piece of pottery to scrape his wounds. And his friends hear about what has happened to him, and so they come from afar. And did you notice what verse 12 said? They saw him at a distance, and they didn't even recognize him. This is a man that is a father. He's a husband. He's a businessman. He's well respected. He is wealthy and successful, and now he's been reduced to nothing. He's lost everything. And his 3 friends come to him. They begin to weep and mourn. And when they finally arrive, verse 13 says that they sat on the ground for 7 days and nights with him. 7 days and nights. There was a group from Broadmoor that just recently went camping for 3 nights. And the pictures of the cars ready to load up were kind of comical. They had stuff piled up all to the top of the ceiling, stuff in the back, stuff in the trailer for 3 nights. Job's friends come and sit for 7 days. And the text says that in his greatest moment of trouble, they came and they said nothing. They were there with him in silence. We also see another example from the account in Exodus chapter 14 with the children of Israel. Exodus 14, beginning in verse 10. It says, when Pharaoh drew near, the people of Israel lifted up their eyes, and behold, the Egyptians were marching after them. And they feared greatly, and the people of Israel cried out to the Lord. They said to Moses, is it because there are no graves in Egypt that you have taken us away to die in the wilderness? What have you done to us and bring us out of Egypt? Is this not what we said to you in Egypt? Leave us alone that we may serve the Egyptians. For it would have been better for us to serve the Egyptians than to die in the wilderness. And Moses said to the people, fear not, stand firm and see the salvation of the Lord, which he will work for you today. For the Egyptians whom you see today, you shall never see again. The Lord will fight for you, and you only have to be silent. The children of Israel have seen some amazing things. God's demonstrated his power among the Egyptians with the 10 plagues, with the death of the firstborn. And after all the signs and wonders, Pharaoh finally allows God's people to go out and to worship him, to start their journey as a new people. But after they depart and they leave from Egypt, he changes his mind. And that's where these verses pick up in chapter 14. Pharaoh is now pursuing the people and coming after them. And they say to Moses, what have you done? Why have you brought us out here only to be killed by this army that's now approaching? Have you ever made a decision? You were on a hike and you decided to take a shortcut, or maybe you were driving and there was a cut through. And it looked like it was going to be faster, it was going to save time, but once you got into it, you realized this was not a good idea. The path is overgrown, there's potholes on the road. And you think, I wish I wouldn't have gone this direction. I wish I wouldn't have made this choice. And that's how the people are feeling. What have we done? Why did we allow Moses to convince us to leave the place we had been for hundreds of years and come out and leave Egypt? In verse 13, Moses tells them, don't be afraid. Don't be afraid. God is going to bring salvation even in this moment, even when it seems like it's impossible. And what does he tell them to do? He says to be silent. Be silent. Be still. Wait for God to deliver. Wait for God to act in this moment. And then the greatest example of one who was able to control their speech comes from the life of Jesus Christ. The trial of Jesus was anything but a fair legal proceeding. Jesus was arrested in the middle of the night, away from the crowds, a time where the Jewish authorities would have opportunity and the upper hand. He was taken to Annas, the former high priest. He was then delivered to Caiaphas, the current high priest, then taken to Pilate, then sent off to Herod, then back to Pilate. And in all of this, Jesus had no legal representation. There was no defense attorney. There were no witnesses that they called to the stand that could offer counter arguments to the charges that were being made. All the while, they're just launching these attacks at him, making these accusations. And after going to Herod and being sent back to Pilate, for the second time. Mark 15 says this, that the chief priests accused him of many things, and Pilate again asked him, "Have you no answer to make? See how many charges they bring against you." But Jesus made no further answer, so that Pilate was amazed. They're getting all these false witnesses to come and to say things about Jesus, about what he said and what he did. And Pilate's sitting in the middle, and he just turns and says, "Well, don't you hear what they're saying about you?" And Jesus just offered no response. Imagine if there was a well-known and respected cardiologist here in Nashville. Someone who had saved hundreds, if not thousands, of lives. And then imagine if there was a group of people that were trying to get him removed from practice. Not because of malpractice, not because that they had ever hurt anyone or injured someone, but because they were making claims about something that they had said. They were being accused not because of what they had done, but because of what others said about them. Jesus is being unjustly charged after spending his entire ministry helping people, serving people. And when the charges are formally brought forward to the Roman authority, he is silent in their presence. And after seeing that type of humility and restraint, Pilate, verse 5, was amazed. He was taken back after seeing this one who did not open his mouth. Well, I'd like for us to finish this morning with a few applications. And the first one is, when we think about a time to be silent, we can see that presence can mean more than words. One of the best things that Job's 3 friends did was to show up. In fact, that might have been the most helpful thing that they did in the whole situation, when they opened their mouths and they started to offer their perspective on the situation and try to explain to Job why he was going through this and that it was a result of his own failures and sins. That's where things started to go south. But their presence, just being there for their friend, if they had just left it at that, their help might have had greater impact. When someone is in a moment of crisis, it's not our job to break down the what, the why, the how, to try to explain all of the details or make sense of why this is happening to them. But instead, maybe it's a time to be silent. Matthew told a great story on Wednesday night about his father. He was attending one of his son's final track meets in high school. And as the race started, his son was an incredible runner. He started off on the track and then all of a sudden pulled a muscle, was injured, and went down onto the ground. And Matthew said that his father got out of the stands and went down, jumped a fence, and went out on the track. I want to see the video replay of that. How long did it take to get from seat down to the track? I was thinking about, well, what did his father say when he got out there? I'm sure he said something to him. But I want you to imagine if he started to ask a bunch of questions. Well, did you have any water before the race? Did you drink those electrolytes? Have you been eating healthy food? Did you do your stretches? You know it's important to warm up. All of those things might have been true. But I bet when he got out there, my guess is he didn't have to say much. When he looked his son in the eyes, he put his hand on his shoulder. His son knew that he was loved. Sometimes our presence means more than our words. What we say is not nearly as important as what we do. And actions and presence in the lives of those that we care about often speaks louder than our words. Secondly, silence reflects trust in God, not in self. The Israelites are facing this incredible difficulty, insurmountable odds with the Egyptians that are coming towards them. And the Lord tells them to stay calm, to put their faith and their trust in God. Psalm 46 and verse 10, be still and know that I am God. And God is telling them to wait on God's timing, on God's power. Don't try to figure out how you're going to solve this problem. Be silent. Be still. You ever worry about your finances? You ever talk about problems that your kids are having? There's one time one of our kids was younger and they were going through this, having all these symptoms. They were eating tons of food. They were drinking all the time. They were having some mood changes. They were having some nighttime issues. And after doing a couple hours of internet research, we had diagnosed them with diabetes. They were diabetic. And so we went to the pediatrician so we needed to get some insulin and the needles and such. And the pediatrician said, no, they're just going through a growth spurt. And it got me thinking, well, how much energy, time, worry do we put into some of our concerns? And we talk about it, and we tell about it, and we ask about it, and we question it, and there's this waterfall of information and thoughts and ideas that are coming out of our mouths, when instead, it might be better just to be silent, to wait on God, to trust in God, to pray, to wait for God's answer instead of trying to work it out on our own. Silence reflects a trust. It's looking to God for his plan instead of trying to make our own way. Next, we see that wisdom is displayed in restraint. Jesus was innocent. He had every right to defend himself. And there were plenty of examples that he could point to that would show what he was saying, what he was trying to do, what his true intentions were. But Jesus knew that ultimately God's will was going to be done. And he understood that had he lashed out at his accusers, had he addressed the crowd and said to them, you have no idea what you're doing, or this is the biggest mistake that's ever been made. His wisdom instead was displayed in his restraint, in saying nothing in that moment. Because he was giving to us an example for all time for someone who was godly that suffered in an unjust way. In Proverbs chapter 17 and verse 27, it says, "Whoever restrains his words has knowledge, and he who has a cool spirit is a man of understanding. Even a fool who keeps silent is considered wise. When he closes his lips, he is deemed intelligent." Whoever restrains his words is wise. Restraining our words. Do we ever restrain what we're going to say? Do we ever keep from speaking even when we might have something to contribute? When I was in college, there was this amazing website that came out that rated professors. It told you how many A's, how many B's, how many C's and D's that they would generally give in a class. And that was useful because you could make decisions about who had a harder class in a particular subject. And then there were the student reviews where people would give real life testimonials and rate their professor. Now, it's one thing to rate a business, to rate somebody providing a service. But what about when we get into the habit of rating our friends? Rate my neighbor. Rate the new person at school or at work. When we find ourselves in a conversation where the topic is, did you hear what she said the other day? Or what are your thoughts on this person? Or you'll never believe what I just heard. When the conversation starts to shift from us to someone else, and the information being shared is negative or harmful, that's called gossip. And when we find ourselves in a situation like that, remember that wisdom is often displayed in restraint, in saying nothing. And finally, you can't learn when you're speaking. Ecclesiastes chapter 5 and verse 1 says, "Guard your steps when you go to the house of God. Draw near to listen. To draw near to listen is better than to offer the sacrifice of fools, for they do not know that they are doing evil." He says it is better to listen than to offer the sacrifice of fools. It's better to listen. You can't learn when you're speaking. When I was in school, one of the classes that I really struggled with was geometry. I didn't understand the assignments. I was confused coming out of the lectures. I didn't know all the different concepts that the teacher was trying to explain. And I was telling my mom about my frustrations. And so she went and met with the teacher. And she came out of the conversation. I said, "How did it go?" She said, "The teacher said things might be a little easier for him if he wasn't always talking to his friends during the class." It's hard to receive instruction and to learn when we're the ones talking. And that goes for the classroom. It applies in relationships, in a marriage. We can't know what's affecting someone. We can't learn about what's important to our kids if we never take the time to listen. There's a time to be silent. And if we do more listening than talking, we'll have a better understanding of the reality of the situation. We're going to close this morning with an invitation song. And if there's something that we can do to encourage you in your faith and your walk with God, then why not use this opportunity today? May God help us to have wisdom, to control our mouths, to use our words to glorify and honor him and to build up those around him. If you're subject to God's invitation, please come forward as we stand and sing.